Why was the most dangerous woman in the yard struggling with a worn, old backpack? The morning air at the NATO training facility was sharp, but not as sharp as the voice of Lance Morrison. "Get out of my way, logistics," he sneered, shoving past her as she stumbled, her old boots scraping against the concrete. She was Olivia Mitchell. To the elite cadets, she looked like a janitor, a mistake, a charity case who had taken a wrong turn from the motor pool. They didn't see the quiet grace with which she steadied herself, the practiced balance of someone used to being pushed around but determined not to fall. The sound of their laughter, that cutting, ugly sound of egos running wild, only fueled the humiliation. Madison Brooks, with her perfect blonde ponytail, tossed a cruel joke. "Seriously, who let the janitor in? This isn't a soup kitchen." Olivia didn't respond. She simply picked up her bag with careful, precise movements and walked toward the barracks. Her silence was not surrender, it was a wall. She was ignored, dismissed by every arrogant glance. But within her, a fierce determination burned, silent and steady. The clothes were a deliberate disguise: wrinkled jeans, a faded windbreaker, scuffed boots, and a backpack held together by a single strap. No one would have ever guessed she was from one of the wealthiest families in the country, raised in gated estates. She was hiding, choosing to be invisible. She had arrived in a beat-up pickup truck caked with mud, her sneakers so old the dew seeped through. While the other cadets postured and strutted with aggressive confidence, Olivia simply observed, standing with a stillness that suggested she was waiting for a signal only she could hear. When Captain Harrow, a man carved from granite, pointed at her and barked, "What's your deal?" "Supply crew get lost," she answered without a blink, her face calm as still water. "I'm a cadet, sir." The truth was, she was an operative in deep cover, a phantom. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. She carried a secret that would not only change their careers but expose the hollowness of their pride. Sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. He deliberately dropped the half-eaten apple onto her empty tray. The mess hall was a battlefield of egos and testosterone. Olivia sat in her corner, sipping water, her tray empty because the food had run out. Jenna Walsh, tall and smug, saw an opportunity. "Here," she chirped, dripping with fake pity as she dropped the apple. "Can't have you starving, right? You need your strength for what exactly?" "Carrying our bags." The laughter of the cadets was a wave of cruelty. Olivia looked at the apple, then at Jenna with steady, unflinching eyes and simply said, "Thanks." She picked it up, taking a slow, deliberate bite, core and all. Jenna had expected tears, anger, any reaction she could mock, but instead she was met with an unnerving calm. The laughter faltered. It sounded forced, uncertain. This anxious anticipation of conflict, the waiting for the moment to reveal her true self, was an internal beat of the story. Olivia was living a lie for a greater purpose, but enduring the constant, small humiliations tested the very essence of her resilience. She was broken down by 1,000 tiny cuts, mashed potatoes splattering on her shirt from Derek Chen, Lance Morrison bumping her into the mud during a run, Madison Brooks hounding her about her appearance. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She just wiped the mess and took another bite. She got up, wiped the mud off her palms, and resumed running. Her ability to absorb the cruelty and continue with unflinching control infuriated her tormentors more than any comeback could. She knew that true power didn't need to shout its presence. She possessed advanced military-grade equipment, an encrypted communication device, and a ruggedized tablet in her locker, yet she chose to tie and retie her frayed shoelaces as a constant reminder of the disguise she had to maintain. The people we dismiss as insignificant might just be the most significant of all. She didn't spend time adjusting the scope, didn't take practice swings or test the wind. The long-range shooting examination was the make-or-break moment. 5 shots at 400 meters, 5 perfect bullseyes, or immediate dismissal. The pressure was brutal. The cadets were a bundle of nervous energy, their confidence gone. Madison missed 2 shots. Lance, the golden boy, managed 4 but was cursing under his breath. Then it was Olivia's turn. Madison whispered, "Bet she can't even hold the rifle properly." Olivia settled into position, her movements calm and almost mechanical. She was using professional-grade shooting equipment, a military specification scope with laser range-finding and ballistic calculation technology. She simply aimed, breathed, and fired. 5 shots, 5 perfect hits, dead center. No hesitation, no visible effort, just cold, mechanical precision that left everyone in stunned silence. The officer could only stare, then announce, "Perfect score." The colonel, watching, a man with steel-gray hair and a chest full of ribbons, leaned forward asking, "Who trained her?" The answer was, no information in her file, but the Special Forces' steady trigger control was undeniable. Lance, his pride wounded, scoffed loudly, "Lucky shots. Doesn't mean she can fight." But the truth was a slow, creeping dread. An equipment check revealed her rifle had a misaligned sight. A defect subtle enough to miss, but significant enough to make accurate shooting impossible. She had compensated for the defect perfectly, adjusting her aim by muscle memory and instinct alone. That wasn't luck. It was the mark of someone who had trained beyond the limits of this camp, beyond the scope of any military record. Olivia was deeply determined to maintain her cover, yet her true capabilities kept betraying her. A quiet cadet, Elena Rodriguez, who was watching her closely, slipped her a spare map after the rifle drill. It was the first act of kindness she'd received. The most powerful statement you can make is the one you never intended to make at all. He snatched the map from her hands and tore it in half with theatrical flair. The navigation drill was a special kind of hell. Kyle Martinez, vying for Lance's spotlight, saw Olivia as an easy target. "Hey, Dora the Explorer," he called. "You lost already, or you just out here picking flowers?" When he tore her map and tossed the pieces to the wind, his group cheered. Olivia stopped, her eyes following the scraps as they fluttered away. She looked at Kyle, her face blank, and said, with a quiet confidence that held a hint of foreboding, "Hope you know your way back." Then she kept moving, her pace unchanged. Kyle's laughter faltered. He didn't know that Olivia had just outperformed every single one of them in the rifle disassembly drill, her hands moving like they were following a script written in muscle memory. She finished in 52 seconds, without a single mistake or moment's hesitation. Lance finished in 1 minute 43 seconds. Later, Marcus Webb yanked a rope free from her hands during a night drill and tossed it in the mud, trying to be the source of evening entertainment. She knelt in the mud, picked up the rope, and started over, her fingers methodical, each knot precise despite the chaos. Marcus kicked dirt onto her hands. She paused, her hands still, and looked up at him, her voice carrying an edge sharp enough to cut. "You done?" She was testing her boundaries, a deep well of anxiety bubbling just beneath the surface as she struggled to keep her cover intact. The rifle skills, the navigation without a map, the quick modification of an oversized tactical vest with a few quick practice knots, these weren't just skills, they were clues to a hidden identity. She was proud of the training she had received, but revealing it meant stepping back into a world of immense danger. She was constantly preparing, her eyes open long after the lights went out in the barracks. It was the heavy, unspoken truth. True power often wears the humblest disguise. The impact was violent enough that her shirt tore. The combat simulation was the test that changed everything. Hand to hand, one-on-one, no mercy. Fate, or cruel irony, paired Olivia against Lance Morrison, 6 feet of muscle and arrogance. He charged like a bull, slamming her against the padded wall. Her shirt ripped, tearing from her shoulder and partway down her back. For the first time, she looked vulnerable. Madison jeered, noticing something in the tier. "She's got tattoos, too." Lance leaned in, ready for the final humiliation, but he paused. In Olivia's eyes there was no fear, only cold, calculating patience. "This is a battlefield," he snarled. "Time to go home, little girl." Olivia looked directly into his eyes, her voice steady and quiet. "Let go." His grip loosened, and the torn shirt fell away. The entire training yard went silent. Etched across her shoulder blade was a tattoo unlike anything they had ever seen. A coiled viper wrapped around a shattered human skull. It was a symbol not supposed to exist anymore. Colonel James Patterson, the observer, went completely pale, his hands trembling as he approached. "Who gave you the right to wear that mark?" he asked, his voice shaking with something between reverence and terror. Olivia stood straight, and the words that followed hit the crowd like a physical blow. "It was given to me by Ghost Viper himself. I trained under him for 6 years." The name Ghost Viper was legend, whispered stories of a mythical, non-existent unit. The trainer selected only one student per decade, marking them with this tattoo as proof of their lethal capabilities. The colonel straightened to attention and snapped a perfect salute. Lance stumbled backward, his face draining of color. Madison's phone clattered to the concrete. Elena, watching, knew the truth. You weren't hiding because you were weak. You were hiding because you were dangerous. The quiet operative's broken cover was now complete. Lance looked like he was about to be sick, but his pride wouldn't let him accept what he was seeing. The golden boy, who built his identity on being the best, couldn't process that this quiet woman was something far beyond his understanding. "Bullshit," he snarled, rage replacing his humiliation. "Prove it in a real fight." He stepped back into fighting stance, his muscles coiled. Olivia looked at him, and the careful blankness on her face was replaced by something colder, more calculating. "If that's what you want," she said softly. She didn't adjust her stance or fix her shirt. Lance charged, throwing a wild haymaker. He followed with combinations that should have overwhelmed her, but Olivia moved like water, flowing around his attacks with minimal effort. Her footwork was so subtle it looked like she was standing still while he exhausted himself. She was studying him, a deep sense of determination in her focus, waiting for the perfect moment. The moment came, and it was over so quickly that most missed it. Lance overextended in frustration. Olivia stepped inside his guard, her arms sliding around his neck in what looked like a brief embrace. 8 seconds from start to finish, Lance collapsed, unconscious. No strikes, no dramatic moves, just a perfectly executed sleeper hold that cut off blood flow with surgical precision. The yard was silent. Captain Harrow, his face unreadable, looked down at Lance, then up at Olivia and made the announcement that shattered the camp's reality. Effective immediately, Olivia Mitchell is designated as an honorary instructor. You will learn from her. You will respect her. Olivia didn't acknowledge the promotion. She simply picked up her backpack and walked toward the barracks, the other cadets parting before her like she was carrying something contagious. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. The engine roared to life with a sound that seemed far too powerful for such an old vehicle. The fallout was swift. Lance, discharged within the week, his dreams over, became a cautionary tale about arrogance and assumptions. Madison's video of taunting Olivia went viral, leading to the immediate withdrawal of her corporate sponsorship. Her social media was a battleground of criticism. Derek was reassigned to the worst duties the base had to offer. Even Captain Harrow was given mandatory retraining. The culture of the base itself transformed. Olivia's story became required reading, a stark lesson about judging people by their appearance. The change in Captain Harrow was perhaps the most telling. The man who had dismissed her now watched her with careful attention, replacing harsh commands with respectful requests. 2 days later, the real reason for her presence arrived. A nervous young officer led Olivia to the main gate. A man stood waiting, tall, broad-shouldered, in a black tactical jacket. When General Thomas Reed looked at Olivia, her carefully controlled expression cracked. Something passed between them, recognition, relief, perhaps even love. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. His reply was simple: "I did." Then Colonel Patterson announced the final, most stunning revelation to the gathered cadets. "This is General Thomas Reed, Olivia's husband." The words hit like a shockwave. The woman who had been mocked as a janitor was the wife of a general, a classified operative with the Ghost Viper's mark. With a single touch to the shoulder that bore the Black Viper tattoo, they drove away in the beat-up pickup truck. They disappeared completely. The past never stays buried, does it? An encrypted phone rang in a secure facility 2,000 miles away. 8 months had passed, 8 months of fragile, peaceful life. The woman who answered it looked remarkably like the former maintenance worker, but her eyes held a sharpness that hadn't been there before. The voice on the other end spoke a single phrase, Code Phoenix. The word instantly shattered the peace. Phoenix had been Ghost Viper's final, supposedly fatal operation. I thought Phoenix was terminated, she said carefully. The target from the original mission. He's alive and he knows about you, the voice replied. Olivia felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She looked at General Reed, who saw her expression and immediately understood their peace was ending. I'll make the arrangements, he said, the knowledge of this moment long accepted. She was about to step back into a world where deception was a matter of life and death. A second call came, the voice urgent. 3 deep-cover operatives were missing in Eastern Europe, their final word a single, chilling transmission. Viper. If Ghost Viper was alive, operating in the shadows, everything she thought she'd left behind was about to become very real. Reed watched her prepare, his wife transforming before his eyes. The gentle softening of civilian life melted away, replaced by the cold professionalism that had made her Ghost Viper's most trusted protege. It was like watching her put on armor piece by piece, the vulnerable human beneath protected by layers of lethal competence. She thought of the cadets at the base, hopeful that some of them, like Alina, had learned the most essential lesson. The ability to appear harmless was her most deadly weapon. Maybe some ghosts are meant to be faced. She walked through their small cabin with quiet efficiency, her hands automatically reaching for equipment stored in hidden compartments. False identities, encrypted devices, and weapons she had hoped never to use again. Each item brought back memories of classified missions. She was doing a methodical inventory of skills that had lain dormant. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very qualities that had made her a target for harassment, her small stature, quiet demeanor, unremarkable appearance, were precisely what made her invaluable as an operative. In a world that expected danger to look intimidating, she could move through spaces impossible for more obvious threats. Her experience at the training base hadn't been an unfortunate chapter. It had been a masterclass in human nature. The classified operation was taking shape in the Defense Intelligence Agency files, an operation requiring her unique combination of patience, silent strength, and the lethal skills that came with the Black Viper's mark. The stakes were higher now. Her core challenge remained the same: how to use others' assumptions about weakness and insignificance as weapons against them. She knew that the cadets would never know how their story had ended, or rather, how it had just begun all over again. But in moments when they were tempted to dismiss someone, perhaps they would remember the quiet woman with the torn shirt and the Black Viper tattoo. She was the daughter of privilege, the student of a legendary ghost, and now, a woman who could choose when to be invisible and when to reveal the steel beneath the surface. Sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought by the people no one expects to fight them at all. What do you lose when you answer a call that whispers of your past life? The encrypted satellite phone, small and dark, felt cold and heavy in her palm, a dead weight reminding her of all the reasons she'd wanted to forget. The word Phoenix wasn't just a code name. It was the echo of a nightmare, the one operation everyone believed had been definitively buried, scorched from the annals of intelligence history. It was a man, a ghost of a target, a master manipulator who could reshape global power structures with nothing more than a whisper and a carefully placed line of code. He was the reason Ghost Viper had vanished, presumed killed, a detail she had never quite believed, a suspicion she carried like a stone in her gut. She ran a thumb over the phone's smooth casing, her face an unreadable mask of resignation. She stood in the center of the quiet cabin, the familiar scent of wood smoke and pine suddenly feeling like a prison. The silence around her had been a sanctuary, painstakingly built, brick by fragile brick, with Thomas. Now a single word had shattered the glass wall of their peace. Thomas, the general, the man who knew her better than anyone, was already moving with the grim efficiency of a soldier accepting an inevitable order. He was gathering the intel she would need, his movements deliberate, his expression mirroring her own inner conflict, a deep, quiet distress. He didn't ask if she was going. He just asked, "How long?" She looked at the grandfather clock in the corner, marking time in slow, agonizing ticks. "The sooner I leave, the sooner I get back." A lie, perhaps, but a necessary one. The briefing room was small, soundproofed, and smelled faintly of sterile air and stale coffee. No grand headquarters, just a safe house miles from anywhere. The walls were covered with high-resolution satellite imagery and complex flowcharts that looked like the nervous system of an invisible global threat. The missing operatives, 3 of them, were displayed on the main screen. One was a linguist specializing in Eastern European dialects, the second a signals intelligence analyst, and the third, a former Olympic athlete, was their extraction specialist. All 3 were assets of immense value. Their last known location, a forgotten border town in the Carpathian Mountains, an area Thomas described as a black hole for intel. Their final transmission, a distorted audio clip containing only the sound of high-frequency static and a single, shouted word, "Viper." The implication hung in the air, thick and metallic. Ghost Viper was not only alive, but he was tangled up in the Phoenix's network, perhaps even leading the search for Thomas's missing team. This was the dark mystery she had to solve, the double helix of her past and her present twisting together into a singular, impossible mission. The vigilance that had been a silent hum beneath her skin for the past 8 months now sharpened into a high-pitched, relentless whine. She wasn't just searching for 3 lost soldiers. She was hunting the 2 ghosts who had defined her life, the man who trained her into a phantom and the target he had failed to eliminate. Thomas placed a file on the table in front of her. It was thin, surprisingly, and marked in stark red letters, OLIVIAMITCHELL. Code name, Silence. She opened the file. It contained only 2 pages. The first was a fabricated identity, a Belgian aid worker specializing in trauma counseling, complete with credentials and a detailed, if dull, backstory. The second was a photo, not of the Phoenix but of herself. The photo was taken at the NATO training camp, a candid shot of her back, the black viper tattoo stark against the pale skin where her shirt had torn. The caption read, "Proof of legend, unbreakable asset, high-value target." Her internal conflict was agonizing. The very mark of her pride was also the greatest liability. If the wrong person recognized that tattoo, her mission would be over before it began. The things that define us are often the things that seek to destroy us. Thomas began to speak, his voice low and precise, navigating the grim technical landscape of the mission. Phoenix is using a dead drop system based on old Soviet communication methods. No satellites, no digital footprint. We suspect he's trying to consolidate power among the fragmented criminal groups still loyal to the old regime. He paused, looking at the screens that showed the missing operatives' last movements. They got too close to the source. The Viper signal. It's a call sign he hasn't used in decades. It's either him or someone who wants us to think it's him. Olivia leaned forward, her eyes scanning the topographical map of the mountains. The peaks were jagged, snow-dusted, unforgiving. This wasn't a mission for brute force. This was a place where subtlety was the only currency. She had to become invisible again, not with the lazy disguise of a janitor, but with the detailed, suffocating anonymity of deep cover. Her mind, trained to process data at lightning speed, began to construct the persona of the Belgian aid worker. Accent, gait, mannerisms, the way she would look at a child, the way she would hold a cup of tea. Every detail had to be perfect. She was determined to inhabit the role fully. This wasn't acting, it was survival. The slightest crack in the facade, the briefest slip of the tongue, could mean capture, or worse, the exposure of Thomas and the entire operation. The moral reflection hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was going to use the language of compassion, trauma counseling, as a shield to enable the most calculated violence. The irony was bitter but necessary. To save the light, one must often travel the deepest into the darkness. She remembered a lesson from her training with Ghost Viper. The enemy only sees what they expect to see. In her case, they expected arrogance, the signature of a high-value asset. They expected the confidence of the general's wife. They expected the skill that had left Lance Morrison unconscious in 8 seconds. What she would give them was grief, exhaustion, and quiet competence, the hallmarks of an aid worker who had seen too much. She asked Thomas for 2 specific items: a list of the aid organizations currently operating in the region and a photograph of the linguist's child. She needed human connection, a genuine emotional anchor for her fabricated identity. The farewell was brief and contained, a choreography of control they had perfected over years of living on the edge. No tears, no desperate pleas, just a prolonged, silent embrace. In that moment, the anxiety she had kept battened down threatened to overwhelm her. She felt the warmth of his uniform, the steady beat of his heart, and the sheer impossibility of the world they lived in. It was a life defined by temporary safety, where every goodbye carried the weight of a potential finality. He kissed the nape of her neck, right where the viper's tail coiled. "Come home, Silence." Her last civilian act was to walk out to the old pickup truck and look back at the cabin. The porch light was on, casting a soft, yellow glow, a tiny beacon of normalcy in a world of shadows. She knew that light would stay on until she returned. It was a silent promise, a contract written in love and fear. She climbed into the truck, pulling a worn, oversized knit hat over her hair, effectively erasing any last trace of the elite cadet or the general's wife. She was just a woman driving a beat-up truck into the night, carrying nothing but a backpack and the lethal truth etched onto her skin. The wheels crunched on the gravel, a sound of irreversible commitment. She was not running away from something. She was running toward the very thing she was determined to destroy, the persistent ghost of her past. She had to become the Phantom again, not just to find the missing, but to finally, definitively, kill the Phoenix. There is no peace for those who know the price of war. Would they believe the story of a Belgian trauma counselor arriving in a place where only suffering was native? The worn passenger ferry sliced through the black, frigid water of the Danube, a slow, deliberate movement that mirrored the forced slowness of Olivia's entire operation. She was Elizabeth Morrow now, her clothes dull and practical, her eyes perpetually tired, the perfect disguise of a woman who dedicated her life to other people's pain. The border town, nestled deep in the shadow of the mountains, felt less like a town and more like a wound that refused to heal. It was a place where history had repeatedly collided with itself, leaving behind a grim landscape of half-ruined buildings and wary, suspicious faces. Her cover was already active. The regional director of the small, legitimate aid organization had met her at the dock, a nervous man named Dragon whose handshake was sweaty and whose eyes darted everywhere. He introduced her as the new specialized trauma support. The first few days were a suffocating ballet of performing normalcy. She spent hours talking to villagers, listening to their repetitive, heart-rending stories of loss and displacement. She offered hollow comfort, her face a mask of weary sympathy, while her mind raced, scanning the environment. Every shadow, every loitering man, every unexpected knock was a data point. She needed to understand the local ecology of fear, the rhythm of the town's paranoia, to find the crack where the missing operatives had fallen through. She felt the heavy blanket of anxiety tightening with every passing hour. This was the dangerous truth of deep cover. You had to be completely open and completely closed at the same time. She had to appear vulnerable enough to be trusted, but remain invisible enough to be overlooked. She never walked down the same street twice, never ate in the same establishment, and her back always faced a wall. Her base of operations was a small, cold room in the aid station, dominated by a large, antique radio receiver that Dragon used for communication with the outside world. This was the first piece of her internal investigation. She had to confirm if Ghost Viper was using an old Soviet-era signal, and if so, how. At night, while the rest of the station slept, Elizabeth Morrow dissolved and silence emerged. She methodically dismantled the old receiver, not with tools, but with the quiet, practiced grace of an engineer who knew the language of electronics better than anyone. She found what she was looking for, a crude but effective modification, an illegal bypass allowing the radio to transmit on a specific long-range military frequency, one Ghost Viper had used decades ago. The discovery, a small piece of soldered wire, was both a wave of relief and a punch to the gut. The ghost was real. She reassembled the radio perfectly, leaving no trace. The knowledge that her former mentor, the man she had idolized and loved like a father, was alive and complicit in the capture of Thomas's team was a deep, sharp pain, a genuine feeling of being broken. It shattered the last vestiges of her childhood belief in the righteousness of her training. She was going to hunt her own past. She spent the next 2 days running surveillance on the town's established power players, the local police chief, a hulking man with a gold tooth and too much authority, and the Sodirus, a shadowy figure who controlled the black market. The Sodirus was the more immediate concern, a network of smugglers and petty criminals who were the eyes and ears of the region. She noticed a pattern. Every evening, the Sodirus's men would stop their usual business, the illegal crossing of goods, the black market trading, and converge at a single, derelict tavern just outside the town. This wasn't a meeting, it was a security procedure. Someone important was arriving or leaving. She needed a way in. During the day, she visited the local police station to file a fabricated report of stolen aid supplies. Police Chief Vasilis dismissed her with a wave of his hand, but she used the moment to deploy a tiny, state-of-the-art listening device, smaller than a grain of rice, under his desk. She caught a sliver of conversation, a panicked exchange about the Viper signal being picked up by an outside agency and the need to relocate the assets immediately. The threat of relocation meant she was running out of time. That evening, she walked towards the tavern, not in her aid worker clothes, but in a simple, faded dress she'd bought from a local market, her hair pinned up to reveal the distinct line of her neck and, crucially, her left shoulder. She was counting on the intelligence network of the Sodirus being quick and the arrogance of Chief Vasilis being slow. She played the part of a nervous woman looking for a family member. It was a deliberate, controlled display of vulnerability. She was using their expectations of female weakness as a lure. As expected, she was immediately accosted by 2 of the Sodirus's men. They were crude and dismissive, expecting easy intimidation. She spoke in her carefully cultivated accent, her words halting and anxious. "I am sorry, I am lost. I was looking for the post office." One man laughed, reaching for her arm. It was the moment. She allowed his hand to close around her bicep. Then, with a barely perceptible shift in weight and a sharp twist of her wrist, she broke his grip and dislocated his thumb with a single, excruciating movement. The other man lunged, but she moved like a blur, her elbow connecting with his solar plexus. He dropped, gasping. It was a clear, unambiguous statement. "I am not who you think I am." The commotion drew the attention of the man in charge inside the tavern. He stepped out, assessing the situation instantly. He was calm, dressed in expensive clothes, and his eyes were sharp. He recognized the professionalism of her reaction. It wasn't self-defense, it was restraint. He knew she could have easily killed them both. He looked at her closely, focusing on her shoulder, and his face shifted from assessment to astonishment. He'd been looking for a ghost, and here she was, standing in the street, seemingly looking for the post office, but leaving 2 hardened men gasping on the ground. He spoke quietly, his voice low. "You are not Elizabeth Morrow." Olivia met his gaze, no longer hiding the steel in her eyes. "You know my name," she simply stated. The risk was monumental. Her cover was blown, but now she was in the game. Sometimes the shortest path to the truth is the most visible. Did he hesitate because of the tattoo or because he saw the ghost in her eyes? The man from the Sodiris network who simply introduced himself as Nico wasn't a criminal boss. He was a gatekeeper. He was far too polished, too cold for a mere smuggler. His eyes, fixed on the coiled viper on Olivia's shoulder, held a depth of awe and terror that confirmed everything. He knew the symbol's true meaning, that she was an unbreakable asset, a protege of the legendary operative who had vanished decades ago. He saw not a Belgian aid worker, but silence, the myth made flesh. Nico didn't attack, he made an offering. He led her away from the fallen men toward a dilapidated warehouse, its interior strangely organized and equipped with a military-grade satellite phone and old maps marked with what looked like historical military routes. He spoke, his voice hushed. The Viper signal. It's a message for the Phoenix's old lieutenants. They've been waiting for this for decades. They think it's their time now. The anxiety that had been a slow burn in Olivia instantly sharpened into focused awareness. This wasn't just about the three missing operatives. It was about a widespread network preparing to execute a devastating, years-in-the-making plan. She realized the NATO training camp, the mockery, the disdain, all of it was a universe away from the grim reality unfolding here. Her silence had been a luxury. Now it had to be a weapon. Nico revealed the truth of the missing soldiers. They hadn't been captured by the Sodiris. They had been taken by a high-value security group operating directly for the Phoenix. Their base was hidden deep within the mountains, utilizing an abandoned Soviet bunker complex. Nico, it turned out, was a reluctant middleman. He had seen the madness of the Phoenix's resurgence, and more importantly, he feared the Ghost Viper's protege far more than he feared the Phoenix himself. He was driven by self-preservation, not morality, which in this world made him a reliable partner. He provided the essentials: a route map to the mountain complex, the current security rotation schedule, and the specific frequency for the Viper signal. He also handed her a small, rolled-up, tightly wrapped scroll of parchment. This was left for you. It was meant to be given only if the Viper mark was verified. She took it, the aged material feeling fragile in her hand. It was a message from her past, a moment of profound inner conflict. The handwriting was precise, familiar, and instantly recognizable: Ghost Viper. She unrolled it, her heart pounding a heavy, rhythmic beat against her ribs. The message was short, cryptic, and carried the crushing weight of betrayal. It read, "You are proud, my child, too proud. You think you can save them all. This time, Silence, you will have to choose, the Phoenix or the Viper. The sacrifice must be genuine. The three are the cost of the greater game. If you try to save them first, you will lose everything. He knows your heart. He knows your husband. Let them go." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mentor, the only man who knew the full scope of her determination, was actively demanding she abandon Thomas's team. Her mission had just flipped from an extraction to an impossible moral test. She was broken by the realization that her past teacher was her present enemy, orchestrating a high-stakes power play that hinged on her capacity for cold-blooded calculus. The message was designed to wound, to make her hesitate, to confirm her worst fear. That Ghost Viper's ruthlessness eclipsed his love for her. She locked eyes with Nico, the air thick with unspoken truths. "The assets are the bait. They're waiting for me. They want to expose me to draw Thomas out." Nico nodded, a grim confirmation. "Phoenix wants a war. General Reed is the prize." Olivia spent the rest of the night poring over the maps, constructing a scenario that allowed her to follow Ghost Viper's order, focus on the Phoenix, while simultaneously subverting it. The moral reflection was simple. She would not sacrifice the innocent to win the game. She would not live by her mentor's brutal code. She would find a third way, a path he had not anticipated. The Viper signal was a distraction, designed to lure her into the main complex where the Phoenix waited. The missing operatives were held in an adjacent, smaller facility, a separate holding unit. She made her decision, one that defied her training, risked her life, and validated her own internal code. She would take the longer, more dangerous route, scaling the sheer western face of the mountain to the secondary holding unit first. Her mission was no longer simply to eliminate the threat. It was to prove that resilience was not found in cold detachment, but in the fierce protection of others. The greatest betrayal is not in being abandoned, but in abandoning one's own truth. Was there a greater pain than knowing your mentor expected your failure? The western face of the Carpathian Peak was a wall of black granite and ice, a brutal vertical ascent that laughed at the concept of security cameras or foot patrols. This was the third way, the path of unflinching determination that Ghost Viper had explicitly told her not to take. He had wanted her to walk into the main facility, to confront the Phoenix directly, to make the sacrifice of the 3 missing operatives a clean, tactical loss. But Olivia would not trade lives for a strategic victory. She was here to prove that she was not merely his student. She was her own operative, driven by a higher moral code. She climbed, moving with the rhythmic, practiced efficiency that only years of intense training could produce. Her hands, bare except for thin, adhesive climbing tape, found microscopic fissures in the rock, pulling her upward with the controlled strength Lance Morrison had utterly failed to perceive. She moved for hours in absolute silence, every breath measured, every movement calculated to minimize effort and noise. The air was thin, carrying the icy scent of pine and high-altitude isolation. She had to fight the constant internal pressure of anxiety, the fear that Nico had betrayed her, that the Phoenix had anticipated her move, or worse, that the 3 operatives had already been relocated. The thought of Thomas's face, his quiet faith in her, was the single, sharp point of focus that kept her going. When she reached the summit, she lay prone on the jagged edge, her breath misting instantly in the freezing air, and activated her optical scanner. Below her, tucked into a deep, natural ravine, was the secondary holding unit. It was a cluster of 3 small, heavily fortified buildings, accessed only by a precarious, single-lane road cut into the mountainside. The facility was small, poorly guarded, and looked temporary, the perfect place to hold assets intended only as bait. It was an arrogant oversight by the Phoenix, a sign that he, too, had underestimated the woman with the Viper tattoo. He hadn't expected her to bypass his ego and focus on the innocent. She used the terrain as her ally, rappelling down the less exposed northern slope, moving through a field of boulders and wind-battered dwarf pines. She approached the fence line, a cheap, electrified chain link that was more deterrent than defense. The security cameras were old, Soviet-era fixed lenses, amateurs. She used a small, highly specialized electronic key, no larger than a matchstick, to disrupt the power flow to the fence and the 3 nearest cameras, creating a silent, 90-second window of opportunity. Her movements were a blur of precise violence, a single, fluid act that carried her over the fence and into the complex perimeter. Inside the first building, she found the linguist Dr. Ilara Vance. She was weak, bound to a chair but conscious, her eyes wide with terror. She whispered, "Viper." They said the Viper was coming. Olivia didn't speak. She knelt, her face close to Ilara's. "Silence, I'm taking you home." She used a single, sharp stroke of her combat knife to cut the restraints. The linguist collapsed into her arms, trembling. The sight of this brilliant, non-combatant woman, reduced to a traumatized victim, was a moment of deep humility for Olivia. This was the true cost of the game her mentor played. The second building held the signals analyst, Marcus Choi. He was defiant but injured, a nasty cut above his eye. He was already prepared to fight. When Olivia entered, he lunged at her, mistaking her for one of his tormentors. She countered the attack with a single, controlled block, careful not to injure him further, and pressed a finger to her lips. She whispered the only thing he needed to hear. "Thomas sent me." The name was the password to his obedience. He saw the black Viper tattoo, but the general's name trumped the legend's symbol. He nodded, his face etched with both relief and professional determination. The third building, the most heavily fortified, held the extraction specialist, Captain Ben Carter. He was a man of immense physical strength, and he was being held in a reinforced concrete room. Two guards were inside, enjoying a crude meal. Olivia had to make a decision in a split second. She couldn't afford a protracted fight that would alert the main complex. She fired two quick, suppressed rounds through the door's thin wooden frame, striking both guards in the neck. The sound was barely a thwip in the cold air. It was a clean, cold action, devoid of emotion, the ghost viper training overriding her personal morality. Sometimes the greatest moral act is the quickest one. She was proud of her control even as she hated the necessity of the violence. She freed Captain Carter, who simply stared at her, then at the tattoo before falling into lockstep behind her. They were out. The long, terrifying descent was about to begin. Could a successful escape be less dangerous than the rescue itself? The extraction began, not with a race down the mountain, but with a silent, terrifying climb back up to the summit of the ridge. Olivia led the group, moving with a fierce, protective determination that communicated her command without a single spoken word. Alara, the linguist, was still weak and shaky, leaning heavily on Marcus, the analyst who, despite his own injury, had already snapped back into operational focus. Captain Carter, the extraction specialist, moved behind Olivia, his face a grim mask of professional respect for the woman who had just executed a flawless surgical rescue. The immediate problem wasn't the Phoenix's security. It was the sheer logistics of moving three non-combatants down an impossible terrain while maintaining absolute silence. They were moving through Ghost Viper's territory, and Olivia knew every shadow, every echo, was a potential trap set by the one man who had perfected the art of anticipating her moves. The quiet air was thick with her anxiety, the fear that her mentor had deliberately left the holding unit underguarded, knowing her moral compass would force her to save the prisoners, thereby ensuring she would be slowed down for the inevitable confrontation. They reached the ridge just as the first sliver of weak dawn painted the eastern sky. The growing light was both a blessing and a curse. It offered visibility but also made them brutally exposed. Olivia knelt, producing a small, high-powered satellite phone from a concealed pouch in her pack. She had a tight window to signal Nico for the extraction, but before she could activate it, Marcus, the analyst, grabbed her arm. "Don't." He pointed at his ruggedized watch, which was acting as a crude directional antenna. "They've deployed something. High-frequency burst signal. It's a localized jammer, too focused for a standard security response. It's designed to isolate a single target." The signal was a silent, invisible cage, confirming her darkest suspicion. Ghost Viper wasn't just waiting, he was manipulating the battlefield to force the duel. She looked at Captain Carter, who understood the command in her eyes instantly. "Take them." She pointed to a deep, narrow chimney cut into the rock, a route only a single person could navigate, but one that would drop them below the jamming threshold and into a heavily forested valley where Nico would be waiting. "It's a 20-foot drop, Alara, but it's the only way." Carter didn't argue. He led the two through the treacherous opening, their desperate descent marked only by the soft scrape of rock on fabric. When they were gone, Olivia turned back toward the main facility, a profound sense of sadness washing over her. She was alone again, exactly where her mentor had wanted her to be. This was the moment of complete brokenness and ultimate determination. She had fulfilled her moral duty to her husband's team, and now she could turn to face the true, necessary enemy. She knew the Phoenix would be arriving at the secondary holding unit soon, expecting to find 4 exhausted, captured soldiers. He would find only one, the woman with the Viper's mark, waiting. The fight is not always about winning, but about choosing the right ground on which to lose. She placed a carefully arranged pile of stones at the entrance of the chimney, concealing the exit point perfectly, a final protective act. Then, using her knife, she scratched a single, jagged line into the metal door of the empty holding unit. It was the stylized head of the Black Viper, the mark of her pride and the signature of her arrival. A challenge. An invitation. She then moved to a vantage point on the highest peak overlooking the facility, becoming part of the shadows and granite. She wasn't running. She was settling in for the hunt. The internal beat was a slow, heavy pulse. The student was finally ready to face the master's test. Less than an hour later, the vehicles arrived. Not trucks, but high-end armored SUVs moving with professional speed and precision. The Phoenix was there. He emerged from the lead vehicle, flanked by 4 men who moved with the chilling, coordinated discipline of a truly elite team. He was older than his last known photograph, but recognizable, sharp-featured, meticulously dressed, and carrying an air of quiet, absolute authority. He was the ghost she had been chasing for years. He walked directly to the empty holding unit, saw the scratch mark, and paused. Then slowly, he raised his eyes to the peaks, and for the first time a genuine cold smile touched his lips. He hadn't won yet. There are no accidents in war, only inevitabilities. Did the Phoenix know that the true danger lay not in the confrontation, but in the silence that preceded it? The man who emerged from the armored SUV, the architect of global chaos and the intended target of Ghost Viper's last mission, was utterly composed. He stood before the empty holding unit, his eyes tracking the crude scratch mark Olivia had left, the stylized head of the Black Viper. He looked up at the mountains, his posture radiating a quiet, profound satisfaction. He had anticipated her moral choice. He had known she would save the others and sacrifice her speed. He was waiting. But Olivia, concealed on the highest vantage point, was no longer merely reacting. She was orchestrating. Her heart, though still heavy with the knowledge of her mentor's betrayal, was now fueled by unshakable determination. This was not a fair fight. It was a duel between a student who had moved beyond her master's code and a target who believed his own legend. Her task was not to fight his heavily armed security detail, but to force him, the Phoenix, into the isolated, vulnerable position Ghost Viper had failed to achieve years ago. She began her assault with silence. Her weapon of choice was not a rifle, but a customized directional sonic device, a relic from her Ghost Viper training that could project focused sound over immense distances. She didn't aim it at his men. She aimed it at the Phoenix himself. With a single, controlled gesture, she activated a low-frequency pulse, below the threshold of human hearing, but specifically engineered to disrupt the cochlear fluid and cause immediate, overwhelming vertigo and nausea in one person. The effect was instantaneous and shocking. The Phoenix, the man of quiet composure, suddenly staggered, his hand flying to his ear. He looked violently distressed, his carefully constructed mask of control shattering. He collapsed to one knee, clutching the ground as if trying to steady a spinning world. His security detail, seeing their leader suddenly incapacitated, broke formation in a panic, their training overridden by confusion. This was the crack in the facade Olivia needed. As his men scrambled, trying to secure their dizzy leader, she used the diversion for a second, crucial act. She pulled out a small, handheld transmitter and activated the Viper signal on the old Soviet frequency. This was a direct, localized broadcast, flooding the local network. But she didn't just send the call sign. She sent a fabricated, high-security code that the Phoenix would instantly recognize as his own highest-level emergency extraction signal. The message was clear: you are compromised. Abandon the field now. The reaction was exactly what she had hoped for: total chaos. The men were torn between their visual reality, a dizzy leader on the ground, and their professional reality, a classified emergency signal. The Phoenix, even through his debilitating vertigo, understood the implications. He knew the signal meant a hostile force had breached his secure channels and was rapidly closing in. He thought he was about to be pincered. The anxiety she had intended to instill in him was now acute, forcing him to make a catastrophic tactical error: retreat. He barked an order to his men, his voice strained and weak. To the bunker, now. He was abandoning the secondary unit, fleeing back to the main complex where he felt safe. His security detail dragged him toward their vehicles, abandoning their search of the facility. Olivia watched them go, a grim sense of satisfaction settling over her. She hadn't fired a shot, beyond the necessary, silent action at the holding unit. Yet she had completely destroyed the enemy's operational integrity and forced the most wanted man in the world to retreat on her terms. She was alone now, perched on the edge of the world, watching the armored vehicles disappear into the winding mountain road. She had saved the team and flushed out the target, accomplishing both the moral and strategic goals. But she knew the fight wasn't over. The Phoenix was not retreating to surrender. He was retreating to an impenetrable fortress, the place where Ghost Viper had last been seen. Olivia now had to decide whether to follow him into the ultimate trap. Her moral reflection was sharp and clear. When the victory is silent, the follow-through must be louder than thunder. She knew she had to take the fight to his bunker, the last place on Earth where she would ever want to go. The place where the final truth about her mentor lay buried. She was going to finish the mission Ghost Viper had started, and she would do it her way. Had Ghost Viper truly failed the Phoenix, or had he simply set the stage for his best student? The abandoned Soviet bunker complex, now the Phoenix's final fortress, was not built in the mountain. It was built under it. Its entrance was a jagged, steel-reinforced maw set into the base of the peak, guarded by layers of outdated but still deadly security. Olivia stood a mile away, concealed by a curtain of heavy fog and deep forest cover. She had come prepared, her backpack now lightened by the fact that she had expended the necessary tools for the rescue and the diversion. She only carried the essentials, her custom sidearm, a few explosive charges, and the absolute conviction that her moral code was stronger than her mentor's lethal logic. She knew this was the trap. Ghost Viper's note had warned her, the sacrifice must be genuine. He had intended for her to walk in, alone, emotionally compromised by the missing team, and be forced into a no-win scenario. But she had changed the parameters. She was walking in alone but with a clear conscience and a mind free from the burden of the missing lives. This was not a rescue, it was an execution. Her heart was heavy, not with anxiety, but with a profound, final sadness for the man who had taught her everything. She moved in, utilizing a drainage pipe she had spotted on Nico's maps, a forgotten access point that bypassed the outermost perimeter. Inside the cold, damp tunnels, the air was thick with the smell of decay and forgotten history. The entire complex was a warren of concrete and steel, a labyrinth of dead ends and reinforced doors. She moved like a whisper, her uniform, a simple black jumpsuit she'd pulled from her pack, allowing her to melt into the shadows. Her determination was absolute, her every movement a focused act of will. She found him in the central command room, a vast, circular chamber dominated by a relic of the Cold War, a huge, multi-panel map of Europe. The Phoenix was there, along with 3 remaining guards who were frantically trying to reactivate the communications and security systems she had disabled. The sonic attack had clearly left him weakened, his posture stiff, but he was holding a high-powered rifle and looking furious. And then she saw Ghost Viper. He was standing behind the Phoenix in the shadows of the massive map panel. He was older, his hair graying, but he was still the most dangerous man she had ever known. He was dressed in the same uniform she remembered. He wasn't a prisoner, he was a protector. He gave Olivia a barely perceptible shake of his head, a silent command to abort. The final, devastating truth hit her. Ghost Viper hadn't been an enemy. He had been in deep, deep cover, embedded with the Phoenix for years, waiting for the one moment when the Phoenix would be isolated enough to be taken out. His cryptic note, his supposed betrayal, his silence, it was all a brutally calculated strategy to protect her and the operation. He knew her sense of duty would force her to save the others, creating the perfect window for him to act. He had sacrificed her pride for the mission. The moment stretched, thick and agonizing. The Phoenix barked, pointing his rifle at the shadows where she had entered. There, take her down. As his guards spun around, Ghost Viper moved. With a speed that defied his age, he dropped the 2 closest guards with clean shots from a suppressed pistol. But the third guard, alerted by the gunfire, managed to turn and fire wildly, the bullets slamming into the body of the phoenix. The man of legend collapsed in a pool of his own blood, never realizing he had been betrayed not by his security, but by the man he had trusted most. Ghost Viper, his face etched with profound grief, looked at Olivia. He didn't speak a word. He looked down at the fallen phoenix, then back at her, and finally at the Black Viper tattoo on her shoulder, the symbol of their shared, brutal bond. He fired a single shot into the control panel, collapsing the roof of the chamber, buying her a precious few seconds. He had made his final, most significant choice, the mission over his own life. He was not leaving the bunker alive. Olivia turned and ran, navigating the collapsing tunnel system, the sound of falling concrete deafening. She escaped through the final drainage pipe, emerging into the pre-dawn fog, her body bruised, her soul broken but intact. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew the final, ultimate cost of their victory. She made her way to the extraction point where Nico was waiting, the three operatives safe. She didn't speak of Ghost Viper's sacrifice. She simply handed Nico the satellite phone and whispered a single, encoded phrase to Thomas. "Phoenix's ashes. Silence is back." She looked at the missing soldiers, now safely breathing the mountain air, and at her own scarred hands. The training camp, the sneers, the tattoo, it all blurred into one long lesson about what it meant to be truly strong. Sometimes the greatest strength is not in the violence you commit, but in the truth you choose to carry. Dignity doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply waits and then acts.